So good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. My name is Julie Duffield, here from WestEd, and where I work as part of the California Comprehensive Center. On behalf of the Secondary Literacy Partnership and the Region 9 Equity Center here at WestEd, I welcome you today to our webinar, We Can Achieve Equity Through Implementing the Common Core. So before we get started, I want to quickly just review some of the ways that we'll be interacting, which I just did. But Patty, before I do that, would you like to tell us a little bit about the Secondary Literacy Partnership?
Sure, that'd be great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patty Crotty, and I work at WestEd in the Comprehensive Center. The Secondary Literacy Partnership is a collaborative of these state organizations, which include administrators, Department of Education, California Teachers Association, and of course the California Comprehensive Center at WestEd. Our mission is to provide support and resources around literacy, specifically tied to the Common Core standards. This webinar, I think, is like the sixth one we've had this year. We also have a number that we did last year, and those are archived, and we'll be talking to you about that later. So I'm ready to introduce Rose, if you'd like. Great. It's what a pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Rose Owens-West, who's the Director of Region 9 Equity Assistance Center at WestEd. I've worked with Rose for a number of years, and I truly know that she's dedicated to pursuing excellence and equity in education for all students. Throughout her professional career, Rose has worked with so many different programs, Title I, Neglected and Delinquent, Indian Education, Smaller Learning Communities, Comprehensive School Reform demonstration programs. She's had experience working with small districts, large school districts, urban, suburban, rural. Rose is truly an amazing educator. Today she's going to be doing a presentation that we asked her to do around equity and Common Core, and I hope that today's presentation provides food for thought, how you can use what Rose talks about today to promote equity around Common Core standards. Rose, thank you for coming today, and go for it.
Well, thank you, Patty. Thank you, Julie, and all of the team that invited me to participate today. I'm truly honored, and I want to thank all of you who are participating in the audience, if you will, for taking your time to spend with us today. We're talking about achieving equity through the Common Core, and the reason that I'm focused on equity is because I work at an equity center, and I want to direct you to our website, encourage you to use resources. We carefully vet the resources that we put on our website, that they are of high quality and they address current issues in research, and so I think you'll find those resources useful, so I invite you to visit that website. Our center is a federally funded center to provide training and professional development on a variety of topics related to equity around closing achievement gaps, disproportionality, bullying, and other things like that. We are authorized by the Civil Rights Act, and our primary charge is to address issues of equity and to ensure the civil rights of students around issues of race, gender, and national origin. Our session today is drawing from a paper. There are 10 equity centers throughout the country, as you saw on our last slide. The equity center directors came together. We developed a paper that is the background piece. The title is there for you, and the reference is provided in the list on the slides, at the list of references on the slides at the end, because we support this important direction of moving toward implementation of the Common Core, but we are very concerned that we ensure that every student benefit from the Common Core. So there's a question on your screen. Have you had an opportunity to look at this paper? So I'd like to just see show of hands with a check mark for yes and an X for no. I encourage you to read it. It provides good food for thought. But that's the background for our presentation, and we're going to just talk about the Common Core and the kinds of things we need to think about and do to address equity. The flow of the session is that we want to point to some key ideas that were presented in the paper, each major topic, how we can apply these ideas. What do these ideas look like in real life, if you will? Provide you with a few resources, and we want to take advantage of the ongoing chat opportunity. So that's kind of how we're going to go today. After each major topic, we'll have a question and a quick write, like we're going to do right now. With Equity and the Common Core, have you had an opportunity in your district to discuss equity issues related to implementing the Common Core? And if you have, please share some of those ideas in the chat area so that we can all benefit.
So, Rose, of the response, Ina said one person said they have read the report, and so we really, as Rose said, encourage you to read it if you haven't had a chance to do that so far. I'll just clear the poll, or you could go down and hit the erase button. So if you could go, as said, to the quick write on the right-hand side and share something about, have you discussed equity issues related to implementation of the Common Core? And type it into the chat. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're waiting. We'll just clear those. Some folks are saying no, but I think we'll just give them a little bit more time to respond. That sounds good.
Someone just wrote in the private message. You can send it. Haven't discussed this before. Right, Stacy.
Okay. Well, we welcome everyone, and we're glad you're here. And hopefully, by the end of our time together today, you will have some food for thought and some resources where you can begin to have this conversation in your respective schools or districts or your situations. I see Julie provided me with a breakout of who signed up, and so we have a variety of roles represented today: teachers and administrators, technical assistance providers. So,
Rose, would you like people to type in quickly what their role is into the chat? Would that be helpful?
Well, yes, if people would like to share that, that would be helpful. And I do have the printout that you gave me, so it'd be good to see who's actually on the phone with us today.
So I think we have a list here about, we didn't do that multiple choice, but we can do. What is your role? Teacher, we have site administrator, district, county office, TA, college, or other. Gina writes, professor in educational leadership, thank you. Grade 6 teacher, you're right. Lots of people wearing different roles. Thank you. Administrator, Common Core instructor, TA provider, thank you. Research, TA provider, director, thank you.
Well, this is good. We should have some good comments today in the chat because we are coming from a variety of roles and responsibilities from different places. So we look forward to your responses and participation in the chat. The Common Core presents a real challenge to us. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's one of the most significant education initiatives that we've had. And yet it also presents a real challenge in that we must really make sure that the promise of the Common Core will not further increase long-standing achievement gaps. And so the key word that we want to address is intentionality. We have to intentionally address equity to ensure that all students, every student, benefits from the Common Core and this new direction that we're taking in terms of teaching and learning. So Many of you have been in a number of professional development sessions, I'm sure, and we've talked a lot about the shifts that are present in both the English Language Arts and the Math Common Core standards. And so the position of the equity directors is that we should also make a shift to improve and expand the academic and personal supports that we provide for students so that we can ensure equity. We also need to shift in terms of making sure that both administrators and teachers have the professional development they need to be able to provide the supports. Administrators to be able to support teachers, and teachers to be able to support students. So we're going to talk about what those shifts look like by, first of all, we want to spend just a moment to define equity and then talking about 6 goals of equity. So we want to stress that when we use the term equity, we're not saying same or equal. Equity does not equal equal. It does mean that sometimes you have to do some things differently. You have to change what you're doing. You might have to provide different services or a variety of services to ensure that each student's needs are being met. We want to stress that equity is just and fair, and we adapted this statement to focus on schools and students. So equity related to implementation of the Common Core must be intentionally attended to at the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level. The way in which we see things, our viewpoint, is what we're talking about when we talk about the equity lens. So we maintain, the Equity Center directors and those of us who are involved in this work, maintain that everything, your policies, your practices, and your programs have to be viewed with an eye toward achieving equity. The example that I want to provide is embedded in the questions that you see on the slide or see on your screen on this slide and the next one. These kinds of questions, the hard questions that you ask, help us to determine the impact and the consequences of our efforts and the consequences of our actions for all student groups. And so, for example, as an administrator or a curriculum and instruction director, you might ask these questions as you review and select programs, or as you interview and select staff to work in your schools. Teachers can use these questions or other questions that they might have to evaluate their classroom activities and instruction. And so we'll come back to this. So the bottom line here is that we're talking about going about the business of schooling differently, changing how we go about the business of schooling so that we can really focus on equity and make sure that every student benefits from a high-quality education. If you use the equity lens, then you're able to develop what we call an equity context. And an equity context is one in which every student benefits. It's the environment, whether you're talking at a district level, a school level, or a classroom level. It's the environment in which every learner is academically and personally nurtured, and every student feels safe. So with that kind of setup, if you will, about how we're thinking about the term equity or the concept of equity, put into the chat any questions that you might have about what we've said thus far, or some things that you've done to create an equity context in your school or district. Again, the context being that environment in which every student can thrive academically and personally and be safe. So what have you done? And we'll look forward to your replies in the chat. And I didn't write your name down, but I did write your question down about leadership, and I did not ignore that. I have some, I want to share some leadership materials with you later. So don't think that that slipped by me, and I thank you for the inquiry. So don't be shy. These sessions work best. We set it up to so that we would have an opportunity for participants to write into the chat so that we can share and learn from one another. I'll keep going.
I'm here.
Oh, I see someone is sharing. I'm not sure if that's pronounced Tinker or Tinker, but thank you for sharing from Gino. I'm sorry, Julie, were you about to say something?
Yeah, just at Linda's comment, she says, PBS teams at all sites and districts levels still in infancy, but finally off the ground, she wrote.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well,
and I just wrote a question because I'm curious, how aware of your own lens and equity do you have to be before you're teaching others? I mean, I'm sure it's an ongoing, as everything, it's ongoing development each time you refine your lens. But how in working with schools and supporting folks out there, how do you see people progressing on developing their equity lens?
Well, thank you, Julie, for the question. It's an excellent one. And before I answer, I do want to say to Bill, thank you for sharing about how you're working with parent education. With respect to developing an equity lens or understanding your lens, that's a really important question in that everyone that I know, and anytime you pick up materials around professional development for building awareness around diversity or multiculturalism or learning to be culturally responsive, the participants, teachers, administrators, are encouraged to understand their own story, understand their own background, look at what shapes their worldview. Secondly, then they are encouraged to really understand the communities and the students that they serve and the backgrounds of the students, the resources that are available in the communities, because then you can understand, if you will, where you might have some biases, where you need to develop a further understanding of the communities that you serve. And so building that equity lens begins with the self. Okay, so positive behavior support, wonderful strategies for helping students. And we're glad to see that you're working with parents, particularly around the Common Core. So we're going to move on. We're going to start then. I mentioned there are 6 goals of equity. And again, in the paper that we mentioned, you will get a little bit more discussion about each of these. So I'll just hit a high point and try to give an example with each one of these. But we begin with the end in mind. What are the outcomes that we want for all students? And so the idea, of course, is that you want to, first of all, eliminate achievement gaps. The achievement gaps are the most common and the most clear indicator that we have of inequities in our schools. And so I maintain that if we are to achieve equity, it demands that we substantively reduce and even eliminate achievement gaps for every group of students. And notice that I say gaps because it's not just achievement gaps, African American students versus white students. There are a number of achievement gaps that we can see, and we need to address them all. And so the issue here then is everybody knows to look at data, examine student data, but we think that it's important to encourage districts and schools now to look at a variety of data sources, including getting data from the students that you serve themselves. We need to Engage students in conversation about their learning experiences, about their schooling experiences, so that we can use that information to make the environment more welcoming, more supportive, and to attend to their needs. We have to ask hard questions of our data. And so we need to look at not just the traditional sources of data, but other data. And so one resource that we're going to refer to you, and Anu, if you could type this into the chat. The Office for Civil Rights within the U.S. Department of Education has a database. And at the present time, that database is being expanded to include data from every district in the country. And it has important information around disproportionality, whether it's the number of students in special education, but also in gifted and talented programs, the disproportionality around discipline. So we encourage you to look at a variety of sources to get at data that will reveal the inequities or equity issues that you may have in your own district or school. Now, classroom teachers, don't get off the hook, because there are, in order to increase the number of students who are academically successful, we want you to be looking at data too. You can ask the students themselves, how well did that learning experience work for you in terms of helping you understand the content that we were addressing? Feedback from the students is important. Another example that I wanted to give is about credit recovery. Because this is a secondary focus in our webinar today, we want to emphasize the importance of credit recovery. And at the district level, there are three things that a district can do. Set policies to make sure that everyone understands the policies and how to carry them out. Ensure that teachers in the credit recovery program are highly qualified, and that you review and monitor the programs to make sure that they're working for students. At the classroom and school levels, you want to encourage teachers, for instance, in the core subjects, to work with the credit recovery teachers to plan and align your instruction. So the credit recovery courses should also be aligned with the Common Core. And you want any kind of tutoring and support classes that you have for students who are struggling learners or students who may not be doing well with the particular assignments that they're having and they need some additional support. It's imperative to make sure that that always aligns with what they're getting in their regular classes and in their core subjects in particular. So on that point, type into the chat what you can do to, some ideas you have about ensuring the achievement gaps. And I see the question from Tom. Thank you, Tom. We got your question, and I am going to answer it in just a few more topics. There's a place where your question fits perfectly, I think. So thank you for the question, and we'll get to that in just a bit. So share with us in the chat some ideas.
Bill, just back, I live in Northwest County and in the lower 18th. My county has the highest dropout rate in Washington and the lowest graduation rate, he shares.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been working on, again, because the high dropout rates for some student populations, we have school districts that have 50% dropout rates for their students of color. In some other communities, we have 66% of the students of color and from other diverse backgrounds are dropping out. And so that's a major issue for those of us here in the Equity Center. And so one of the things that we're encouraging encouraging districts and schools to implement is early warning systems. And the early warning systems, I was going to talk about this a little later, but early warning systems provide a process for identifying students who are at risk of dropping out, targeting the interventions to help them, monitoring the students and the interventions over time. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but thank you for sharing that. Absolutely, celebrating students, tracking students from graduation after high school. Absolutely. And on that point, thank you for that. That was from Lynn. On that point of tracking students after graduation, you know, it's important to talk to those students if you have access to them. What worked for you in your schooling experience while you were in our district? What prepared you for success in college? What things do you wish you had more of to prepare you for college? We don't take advantage of that tremendous resource in terms of getting information about the effectiveness of our programs, and also using them as role models and mentors for students to say, I did it and you can do it too. And so those things become very important, those success stories. So thank you for prompting that. Inspiring kids to learn at an early age, absolutely, that's important. We're going to move on to Goal 2, equitable access and inclusion. Basically, we're talking here about reducing the statistics on disproportionality in special education, in gifted and talented programs, in honors programs, and advanced placement courses. Another area of disproportionality is in the area of discipline. And so disproportionality is the second most common and clearest indicator, one of the clearest indicators we have of inequities in our schools. And so we have to really look at our policies, our programs, our practices for identifying and selecting students to participate in education programs. And we have to work with teachers and students and parents and administrators so that they understand that all students can benefit from rigorous instruction, and to eliminate the idea of who can be successful and who can't. We believe that all students can be successful with given the right support. And so, for example, a key question that I want to put before you is, you know, we talk about successfully graduating from high school in 4 years. But if students come into high school from a range of levels, why do we think that that everyone must finish in 4 years? And this came up in a group discussion of some districts that I'm working with. You know, we have students that stay in school, but they stay in school and they graduate, but it might take them 4.5 years. We've had students that's taken 5 years to graduate. We don't get to count that as a success. And yet, those students overcame tremendous challenges. They beat the odds and were successful in that they were awarded their diplomas. So we need to rethink some of our policies and practices and how we count success if we are to make sure that there's equity in access for all students and how we include students. As a resource, I want to refer you to a webinar that we had just on Tuesday, Glendale, Arizona, Glendale, Arizona presented because they have been recognized for increasing the diverse number of students who take and succeed in advanced placement courses. And one of the key elements that ran throughout their presentation, because and the nice thing they did was to present at the district, the school, and the classroom level. They all talked about high expectations and the work that they did around building high expectations for their students, creating a culture, if you will, for high expectations. And the outcome is that they have more students who are successful. So thank you for sharing. I saw the comment about double dipping. There are lots of strategies that we can use to improve equity for students. So thank you for sharing those ideas. I appreciate that. Okay. So other ideas, please include them. And if there are questions. Now, I want to speak to this notion of double dipping. And for some years, I did a lot of work around high school redesign, and we talked about block scheduling and extending the amount of time that students spend in classes focused on a particular content area. And so one of the things that I want to stress about that is, again, at the outset I said we have to rethink, we have to shift the supports for students, be more supportive of students. But we also have to make a shift in being supportive of teachers. And so if you're going to do things like double dipping, extending the instructional time for students, make sure that you're providing the professional development for teachers to be effective in using that additional time, in providing reinforcements that really move students forward. And so I just wanted to stress that. It's so important that a lot of this depends on our providing the support that we need for teachers. Okay, goal 3, equitable treatment. I want to stress that we're talking about students' experiences in the school and classroom settings. The first thing that I want to emphasize here on your screen, you see the comment, the bullet, examine policies and practices that serve as barriers to equity. And I want to get back to the issue of discipline. Many of our discipline policies lead to inequitable treatment of students. And we've had districts that have been identified for overwhelming disproportionality in terms of how penalties are meted out to students. They're unfair, they're inequitable. And the high rate of out-of-school suspensions for certain student populations, males, male students of color, students with disabilities. Sometimes those penalties have tragic consequences for the students. We know that even if they don't result in tragedy, extended time out of class is not conducive to learning. I like to say the students are learning something when they're not in school, but it's not going to be necessarily aligned with the Common Core standards. And so we want to make sure that we take advantage of every opportunity to keep students in school, keep them engaged. Two policies, they're called different things in different states, but for example, some states call them willful disobedience policies. Other states call them willful disregard for school rules. And these have become policies that are kind of catch-alls, and where it's easy to have a student, it's easier to have a student suspended from school under the policy of willful disobedience or willful disregard for school rules. And so one of the things that we have to do is to help teachers find more positive and effective ways to discipline rather than punish, and to engage students effectively in the learning environment. We have to work on that. And so one of the things that you'll see in these examples that I've given, they've not necessarily focused on English language arts. And that is because we believe that in addressing equity issues, even with the implementation of the English language arts or the math standards, you have to attend to all of the areas of school life. That's why we said the policies, the practices, the programs, look at all of them with respect to what are the outcomes in terms of equity. And so the English language arts teachers, those teachers who are responsible for that content, and as we implement those standards, let's provide professional development for teachers around effective classroom strategies, on recognizing student behaviors and engaging students. One resource that I want to mention is from here in California. We've been doing a lot of work on discipline with a number of districts and the California Department of Education. And Public Counsel is an organization that has a toolkit that is available called Fix School Discipline. And so you want to take advantage of that resource if you can. I'll see if I can paste that into the chat here. Fix School Discipline. And that's a toolkit focused on how do we improve the environment and how do we help students in terms of building discipline as opposed to punishment. Another aspect of this equitable treatment that I want to speak to is in this bullet around providing teachers with professional development to teach in culturally responsive, differentiated ways to ensure that all students can learn. Again, student engagement is absolutely critical to their being successful. And so another resource that we have that's listed in the references on one of the last slides of your PowerPoint is the school discipline package that was just released by the U.S. Department of Education. It's a collaborative effort between the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice. And it provides guidance around what we can do, communicating effectively with students and parents about the Common Core standards, helping them plan their for their academic career, if you will. What information do you make available to parents and to students so that they can choose their courses wisely? There's a lot of work being done in a number of districts, a number of states around building linked learning, where you have a strong academic core and you have a strong career technical education core that students take advantage of. How do we make information available, and how do we make sure that parents and students use that information to make wise choices about the career academies that they'll participate in, or the selection of courses they need to ensure that they can make the right choices after high school, whether it's for career or for college. And so communicating effectively with all students and their families. And because so many of our schools and districts have many languages represented in the schools, we make materials available in various languages, and that's excellent. But what else can we do? Just because you send a newsletter home doesn't mean that you've communicated effectively. So how do you build those communication streams? How do you make sure that there's an adult advocate to work with every student? I'm working with a group, and they have what they call student success advocates, and I'm sure you all familiar with that concept. So how do we ensure that there are student success advocates for every student? So we're going to ask you then about some other ideas that you have around equitable treatment, and I'm going to look over the chat to see the kinds of things that you've been suggesting.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. I think we'll just give folks time to type in the chat. So please, if you have any comments, thoughts, questions that arose for you and Rose was sharing this information, things that resonated for you, just please feel free to jump in. Carrie wrote, working with parents and equity issues is an important part of teachers' jobs, but it's hard to do this. So, and then as we work through, I think that, I'm just looking at Tom's comment.
Good comment, Carrie. A lot of this is not easy, and I think that one of the ways that we try to make it easier, again, and why I keep emphasizing the support for teachers. I've worked with a number of districts where they've had leading educators come in and do professional development around cultural responsiveness. But there isn't the follow-through. In our office, we focus a lot on implementation. And so, and this will get to the answer that I'm going to give to Tom's question in a bit too. We focus a lot on implementation in terms of you can't just have a workshop or even a series of workshops for teachers around cultural responsiveness or, understanding students from diverse backgrounds. You have to follow that up with opportunities for teachers to apply what they've heard in the workshops. You have to have those strategies, have a focus on cultural responsiveness, be embedded in all of the professional development. So, for example, I had the opportunity to listen to a district talk about their plans, make a presentation about how they were providing professional development around the Common Core. And so lots of strategies on understanding the standards, breaking down the standard student assignments, creating the right kind of student assignments and those things. And then they had a set of questions that they gave to the teachers. How will this work for your English learners? How will this work for your students with disabilities? Well, I think it's a first step to ask the question, but rather than ask the question as an afterthought, have that embedded in the professional development that you're doing from the outset. And so you're absolutely right. We need to make it easier for teachers, and we need to provide ongoing support to them around these issues. And Carrie is reinforcing the idea that a place to begin is understanding your own beliefs, your own background, your cultural biases, and that's what I was saying in answer to Julie's question about developing a cultural lens.
Thanks, Rose. And then, did you see Jeannie's comments? She just said, her students are working on their administrative license often feel, she wrote, beat up or over equity issues. It makes them defensive. How can we approach equity from the heart instead of the head, she wrote?
I think that's related to Tom's question.
Right.
And I wanted to address that in opportunities to learn, but since it's come up again, I actually think that the two are very connected. I think the heart and the head are very connected. And I say that meaning this. I do believe that in providing professional development for teachers around being culturally responsive or addressing teaching students from diverse backgrounds. We have to expose teachers to success. I don't think in a lot of situations that we really help teachers see that students from various backgrounds really can be successful. And we don't give them an opportunity to talk about their difficulties in a safe environment. And so Tom's question earlier was, how can predictable issues related to implicit bias, meaning beliefs around whether low or poor or EL students or students of color can reach a higher bar, how do those issues related to implicit bias get addressed in the context of professional development and collaboration around implementing the Common Core? And I see in that your question as well about how do we make this a heart issue and a head issue. I do think that most teachers, I choose to believe that most teachers are in the business because they want to have an impact on young people's lives. And so I choose to believe also that most teachers don't get up in the morning looking to see who's going to fail in their classrooms today. And so with that as a foundation, believing that teachers do want to do a good job, that they want to see all of their students succeed, then with that as a foundation, I think it's important in professional development to provide a safe environment for teachers to really talk about the challenges they have with students and their challenges and even frustrations in terms of teaching, and being supported, not just to vent, but to share those in a way that they get support from administrators, fellow teachers, instructional coaches around strategies to reach their students that they are not reaching effectively. I think that professional development has to be embedded in the job, and by that I don't mean just that it's related to the content standards that the teachers are responsible for, but that the issues of diversity, equity, cultural responsiveness, that's not an add-on. That's not a special event or series of events, but rather those issues and attention to those issues, strategies for succeeding with students from diverse backgrounds are embedded in every professional development opportunity. If you have weekly grade level or department meetings or content area meetings, then issues around cultural responsiveness, how to reach more challenging students, how to reach students who are struggling, how to serve diverse students, cultural responsiveness, that should be a part of every conversation that you have. If you're focused on the standards, then let's say the English language arts standards, selecting materials, then if you're focused on, your focus should be on how do we select appropriate materials that reflect different cultures, different points of view. How do we present those? I think part of the heart issue is that we have not provided the support for teachers to feel confident as well as competent to reach students from diverse backgrounds. And so we need to understand that. I'm going to come back to discipline. We have to help teachers understand student behaviors. We have to do more about that, and give them strategies to avoid escalating situations. I've been in many classrooms where students were, they were difficult, they were challenging, they were defiant, but the teachers' strategies that I've seen only escalated those situations. What are we doing to help teachers use basic conflict resolution or strategies to de-escalate situations and keep the students engaged. So those are head issues, but they're also heart issues because the confidence and the competence that teachers need to feel to reach their students, I think, is important. Let's move on. So that was my answer to Tom's question. Focus on ongoing professional development that continues to address these issues and allows teachers safety in talking about their challenges.
So Lynn just wrote, as a professional developer, you are making me think.
Oh, was that it? Well, good. That's what we want to do.
I know it's hard when you're presenting to get that, so I was just wanting to let you know that you're all making us all think here, Rose.
Thank you, and I appreciate your feedback because you need to know I'm learning too, and so that's why I keep pushing you. Put into the chat because you're absolutely right. It makes us think. And I will say one other thing before I go to goal 4. We talk about high expectations for students. We want everybody to have high expectations for students. But I have to also say that I've been in a number of situations around professional development for teachers. We don't have high expectations for our teachers. And so that's why I said start from a foundation of believing that teachers want to do a good job, that they want to see their students succeed, and give them the safety. That's what we do for kids, or what we say we do for our students. We need to do that also for teachers. The Common Core, I think, is a wonderful opportunity, but I think it's quite challenging for teachers. How do we help them feel safe? And how do we help them develop the confidence that, yes, they can, even with the diversity of students that they have, reach all of them with the Common Core? Equitable resource. So thank you for those points, and thank you for those comments. On the issue, I'm checking my time here, so we need to move on. With equitable resource distribution, goal 4, I want to point to the first bullet again, expert teachers. Again, competence and confidence for the teachers. And equitable does not mean the same treatment for everyone. So, for example, there's a resource that's listed. Anu, could you put that one up? The Understanding Language. If you have not visited that website, I encourage you to do so. Understanding Language, Language Literacy and Learning in the Content Areas. This is a website that's being, they've had a series of papers that were developed, one of which I'm citing in just a moment, and they will have resources for teachers around helping English learners as we implement the Common Core. Dr. Kenji Hakuta from Stanford University School of Education is one of the leaders of this effort, and the materials are excellent. So, for example, equity does not mean equality. We want to use equity to reach equality for all students, but it doesn't mean treating everybody exactly the same. And the example that I want to give you of what this means, building expert teachers. In an article that's included on that website, Understanding Language, Bunch, Kibler, and Pimentel suggest that for helping English learners realize opportunities around the listening and speaking standards, encourage teachers to offer a variety of classroom discourse structures and opportunities. And one of the things they say you can do is you've given students an assignment that they have to complete, and they have to complete that written assignment in English. But if you have students who are English learners and have whose first language may be other than English, allow them to talk to one another and work together, work collaboratively on the assignment using their native languages. Now, that sounds really simple, but what does that require? That requires a teacher who has set an environment in the classroom of trust. I will trust you. I may not speak your language, but I'm going to trust you to use your language to do this work and trust you that you will be focused and on task. And that requires a teacher who is comfortable with her students and confident that her students will do as they've been asked, that they will be on task, that she has set a classroom culture, a classroom environment of trust where students work together, an environment of collaboration, and where she's expecting students to be high performers. Yes, I'm going to allow you to use every tool you have to do well on this assignment. Therefore, one of your tools is comfort in your own language. So there's a lot. It seems simple, but there's a lot embedded in that strategy. So I encourage you to check out that resource that we have. Moving along, on the last bullet, reducing dropout rates. I want to come back to early warning systems that I mentioned earlier. And, excuse me, there's another resource that I'm going to paste into the chat for you. The early warning system is a process for identifying students who are at risk of dropping out, identifying their indicators of their dropping out, looking at their data, knowing those students, understanding why they're at risk of dropping out, and those indicators have to do with attendance, behavior, and their academic performance. You align interventions to meet those specific needs, and you monitor and track these students over time to make sure that the interventions are working for them. And so very often, it's powerful to combine early warning with RTI, because RTI is a system of providing interventions at increasing levels of intensity and purposefulness for students, and the early warning system combined with that allows you to track and monitor both what's happening with the students and the effectiveness of the interventions. And so, again, in terms of providing the interventions, it's not just academic resources that you're going to use. Tutoring, credit recovery, after-school support or Saturday support. So there are academic resources that you use, but there may be other resources that are needed from the social services or mental health. There may be peer support, student-to-student peer support that you might have. We're working on implementing early warning with a number of districts that have large populations of American Indian students. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for the district and those tribal communities to work together to support those students, to provide them the encouragement to stay in school, to have that adult advocate who's, someone who's in their corner, helping them and impressing upon them the importance, let's say, of regular attendance. So equitable resources means looking at all of the resources that are available or that at the school's disposal or the teacher's disposal. It may be identifying resources that you haven't, identifying and using resources that you have not used or tapped before. So I'm going to put the chat up and see what kinds of things you've been talking about. Restorative justice, wonderful. Yes, restorative justice is one of, I mentioned that in California, There's a lot of work. I may not have mentioned the state, but it was California, where there's a lot of work being done around discipline with a number of districts, I think, and the State Department of Education and Public Counsel. And PBIS and restorative justice are two of the strategies that a number of districts are looking at implementing to improve discipline.
And
yes.
Carrie writes, it's amazing the difference that can be made when schools start monitoring school attendance, Rose.
Yes, I was going to just comment on that. Thank you, Julie. I saw your comments. Thank you, Carrie. And what I would refer you to are some webinars. There are some webinars that we've hosted here at the Equity Center and Schools Moving Up with Hetty Chang on attendance works. And we want to encourage you to make use of those resources. And again, in the early warning system, attendance is, monitoring is absolutely critical. So thank you for that confirmation, Carrie. I appreciate that. So I want to refer you to those resources and encourage you to use those. Need to move along. The time goes so quickly, and I was going to be very disciplined in my comments, but your chat comments spark additional ideas, so thank you for that. On opportunities to learn then, the key word here is sum total. What is the sum total? And so, yes, this is secondary literacy. This is a part of the secondary literacy community of practice. We're focused on the English language arts standards, but we're talking about everything that's available in the school setting or the district setting to support students so that these secondary students will be able to succeed in their core academic subjects, that they will have the literacy skills, listening, writing, speaking, reading, that they need to succeed. And so equitable opportunities to learn, the sum total of everything that you need to guarantee students learning. And so what I want to mention here as a resource is an article that we had as a product from our center, Dr. Adam Voigt, who is with our Health and Human Services program. As many of you are from California, so you know that the Healthy Kids Survey was required for many years of all districts. And so with over 1,000 districts and multiple years, that's a pretty solid database. And so the developers of the Healthy Kids Survey, year before last, did a reanalysis or a meta-analysis of the results of Healthy Kids surveys over the years across all of these districts. And what we learned in that was that there is a racial climate gap that is an exact mirror image of the achievement gaps that we experience. Climate was defined as students being engaged, students feeling supported in the school environment, and students feeling safe. And so if, in fact, students are themselves reporting in these surveys that they're not being engaged, that they don't feel supported, and they don't feel safe, then those are direct things that we can address. And so I've included that article. It's listed in your references. It's called The Racial School Climate Gap. And there's a link to it. That paper is available on our website. And so in the school environment, again, we're talking about these 6 goals are a comprehensive approach to creating an environment in which teachers are supported and students are supported. And so what do we need to do to, again, provide the training, working with parents and students both so that they understand, you know, there's plenty of room in equity to help students take responsibility for their own learning. But they need to have the information in order to be able to do that. So when we talk about opportunities to learn, we didn't put a chat there, or meant to, but go ahead and add into the chat some ideas that you have about opportunities to learn. It's the sum total of everything that we do should be viewed through an equity lens and directed toward an equity context, building that environment for all students to succeed. The final goal is equitable shared accountability, and we come full circle because the accountability then speaks to goal number 1, high outcomes, high academic performance, and high outcomes for all students. So equitable shared accountability. Some years ago, Joe Johnson and his colleagues, some of you know Joe Johnson, Dr. Joseph Johnson from the National Center for Urban School Transformation. He wrote an article called Efficacy, Responsibility, and Urgency. He talks about that school leaders need to create a sense of urgency around closing achievement gaps and raising performance for all students, raising achievement for all students. But you also have to then share the accountability. But that means giving everyone, teachers and administrators, what they need, the training they need to meet their responsibilities, giving parents information and support they need to support students, and giving the students what they need so that they can make good decisions, so that they can develop a love of learning even. We don't talk much about that, but students need to, we need to demonstrate and model a love of learning for our students. And so equitable shared accountability speaks to that distributed accountability, if you will, for high achievement for all students. Excuse me. So the resource that I would share with you is an article that's listed in the references, and it's from the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and it is Leadership for Equity. And it's a nice, quick, relatively short article that raises a number of excellent points about addressing equity. And so someone said that they are working with persons who are working on their administrative credentials, I believe, and so that will be a good article for you. So share with us in the chat your ideas for improving equity in terms of shared accountability and opportunities to learn. Okay, Gino is sharing some strategies. Thank you. He's talking about the Hour of Code event, and so that sounds very interesting. And so if there are others of you who want to share in the chat, thank you for that. We're going to move right along because our time's almost up. The final additional considerations, just some questions to spark your thinking and as discussion prompts. There may be other discussion prompts that you want to raise, and type into the chat any questions that you may have. We're going to conclude that there is a promise of the Common Core, but there are also challenges. And so we've tried to highlight some of those. And at the end of the paper, there are some recommendations for you. So we have just about 6 minutes left. I'd like to see if there are some additional questions and then turn it back to Patty and Julie for closing us out. Hello.
Hey, Rose, we're here. We're just watching, asking people if they would like to type in their own thoughts. Bill says, have you any thoughts on different pieces here? We're asking folks before they leave to give us their feedback on the survey that Ani's posted in. And yeah, this is a time to do final reflections and thoughts about the implementation. Patty, jump on in if Carrie and all of you see pieces. And Carrie writes, including families and communities and understanding the Common Core is really important to do, but often hard to do.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely important.
And Bill, if you want to have finished your typing, we really do appreciate all of the thinking that has happened in the chat and the reflections by everyone. So as we end off, I'll ask folks for a final reflection. What brought you here? What's often, I think what I was just sharing back and forth with Stacy, is often what you're sharing is things that we already know but need to just remind ourselves about. AVID, different programs that we've put in place about conflict management, and just sometimes it's just reconfirming what you're already doing is a good thing to think about, Rose.
Absolutely. Someone, Ron Edmonds and Asa Hilliard, have been quoted many times. We really know what to do for students. We have a lot of strategies and things that have worked effectively. We need to, one, and this speaks to the heart issue that was raised by Carrie, I think, and Tom earlier, we need to have the will to implement those things, and we need to apply them for all students. And so, yes, we have a lot of tools at our disposal to improve the strategies, to improve the outcomes that we have for all students. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate your feedback and input today.
So as we end off here, we don't want to rush. This is a big question. In your role, what is one step you can take in the next month towards effective Common Core implementation for all students? Well, one thing that I'm going to do, Rose, I'm stepping out of my facilitator hat into my parent hat. In the district where my kids went to recently, one of the feedback about the Common Core was, you know, our kids aren't common. And I think that people who have been successful in traditional system, sometimes of assessment, often don't want to take risks to change assessments that would open it up for all students. The one step that I'm taking as part of my PTA involvement with the PTA is just building more understanding about, you know, access to assessments that are really valued to all students, just building that awareness in the community of parents that I work with and am part of.
I think that's important. One of the best, and some you may all be familiar with these already, but specifically on the Common Core, building awareness and helping parents to understand. The materials from the PTA are available in English and Spanish. They're available by grade level, and they give information on both the math and the English language arts standards in formats that are, shall we say, in layman's terms for parents to understand. If you're not familiar with those materials, I encourage you to become familiar with them and use them. But you're absolutely right. We need to work with parents. That's so important. Our website for the Equity Center is posted there. You can email us, and we are faithful to try to respond to all of our emails. We welcome emails and inquiries. And so, again, I want to thank you all for allowing me to participate with you today. And I don't know, Julie, was there other information in terms of the secondary literacy that they wanted to put up as well? I wasn't sure about that.
Patty, just hit star to unmute your phone. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Patty to thank you, Rose. And folks are sending some of their reflections in there. You can see them in the chat as we wrapped up to your final comment and question.
And I just want to, Patty, I'd like to just remind everyone to visit the Understanding Language website, because that website talks about resources and strategies for English learners around mathematics, science, and English language arts. So it isn't just English language arts. And there are videos there, there are papers, there are discussion prompts. It's an incredible site. And then Stacy, in the comment chat section today, talked about restorative justice. She gave I sent out a link for a blog which provides 2 examples of 2 districts that are using that, and Stacy sent out the link for the restorative justice site, which was important. Rose has provided a number of resources here, and we really urge you to take advantage of those. And if there's any last questions you want to ask Rose, feel free to type them into the chat area or email the Equity Center.
Thank you, Patty. And we just want to let you know that this is, as Patty initially introduced it, a part of a series, and this is number 6. And so it will be archived. Thank you, Anu, for showing and telling people where it will be archived afterwards. Please contact, and we'll also have links where you can contact the Equity Center as part of that archive. And then for coming up, we really invite you all to the next webinar on April 1st, California's Smarter Balance Assessment. And we'll send you information about that. And I think as we wrap up here, we really want to thank you again for being with us. We're going to post out a quick survey to get your feedback. And what we'd also like you to do is, Rose, any final comments and thoughts? I see that you already jumped into the chat. And thank you so much for getting us to think today and sharing all this information, and to our participants and panel members who've reflected. So thank you so much. So we're going to push out the survey, ask you to give us comments. But Rose, one final reflection comment as we end off to today.
Well, no, just thank you. And by your participation, I know that you're committed to raising achievement for all students. And reach out to us here at the Equity Center if there's some way that you think that we might be able to assist you in that effort. And thank you all.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. And thanks again, Rose, and thanks to our participants and panelists. We're officially ending today's presentation. And come back and see the archives and continue the great work you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Patty, for being here. Thank you for everybody, for all the panels participating.